One of the surprising features is how much of your work is held in public collections around the country, and how active various local authorities, small education authorities, councils, museums and things were in acquiring work from contemporary British artists during the 60s and early 70s. And of course there's all the things that you kept as well, which meant that there was a considerable quantity to choose from of things that I was very interested to look at.
But I was surprised that you included work that was so early. Really student work, and some of those things made when I was still at the Slade. Columns came at the end of a sequence of work in my last year as a student. I think that's about all that remains of that. There may be one or two plaster things that remain of that sequence of work that, when looked at in retrospect in the slides that I still have, shows me very clearly working my way away from a figurative image, which was actually not easy for me to do. I mean, it seemed that you could just, one would think one could just abandon a figurative reference and move directly. I couldn't. It was actually quite difficult and slow. And the work that I made now, when I look at it, seems to kind of begins with the two figures doing something related to the very first sculpture I made, that carving of two figures. But then the image kind of goes through a sequence of where it becomes a kind of insect, and then it becomes a kind of vegetable form, and then it becomes something much more abstract. And finally, the big break is where it references something, I think, mechanical, you know, and then I get to something much more purely abstract, which are those columns. There were a lot of white reliefs that were all geometric, and then at some point I introduced a curved edge into the white reliefs, and then a curved surface into the white reliefs, and then I went away from the curved surface, which might have connected with the cones in some way. But then I started making these colored reliefs, which was when the constructivists broke with me. They said I couldn't do that. Couldn't use the curved edge, and I couldn't use the color. But I liked the way the color...
You were expelled.
Yeah. Yeah. But I liked the way the color, you know, appears as a different color where it, you know, moves against the light. Just, you know, whereas the white reads as a gray or a...
So was it a pleasure to be expelled?
It was mixed. It was mixed. I mean, I felt angry and hurt and sort of vaguely relieved, but I couldn't, you know, I think I felt more angry and hurt than felt relieved. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a pleasure, no, it was mixed. I mean, I think I had begun to feel that that whole constructivist, you know, kind of realm that I had touched upon and that had been important to me as a way of thinking about what I was doing when I was no longer, you know, working with, you know, a reference of something out there, a figure or something else. You know, it enabled me to kind of have some kind of position and think about what I was doing. But I think it began to feel like a sort of straitjacket in some way. If you look back at the work of the previous generation, people like Lynn Chadwick, Kenneth Armitage, that generation, people who came immediately after the war and after Henry Moore, all of that work now, to me, looks very kind of compromised. They want their cake and they want to eat it. They want to be abstract, but they don't want to give up, the world of the figure. And it feels very compromised to me, that most of that work. I mean, you find a good piece here and there, but as a body of work, it feels very uncomfortable. It was an important issue for me, to not get bogged down in that. So it was necessary to find a clear way. Once I decided that I couldn't continue making a figure, it was important to find a way to do something else, and it wasn't easy.
The plywood ones seem a bit like kind of knitting. You get this kind of fantastic carpet thing that there comes an issue at the edge as to where they stop. Sometimes the decision might well have just been the size of the floor, the size of the available studio space. What were the points where does the thing end?
It had to do with my sense of having, got to a place where beyond what I could reach. Some sense of it being commanding enough square footage without seeming to be greedy. Coming to this piece, I kind of began to wonder what came next. The work is beginning to be a purely visual phenomenon, to almost disappear. And it was the end of the road for me, in some kind of sense of trying to make something that I could call a sculpture that didn't offer itself as an object. That's a kind of intellectual kind of game in a way, but the feeling was this had become so immaterial, and so I wanted something with some heft to it, some substance to it. I wanted to get back to something that felt more real, more substantive in some way. And the shed offered me that possibility. It just happened, fortuitous, that I started playing with this material that had been a shed.
And at what point did materiality itself become something of real interest to you? Certainly post-breakdown, the materiality becomes hugely various, the rubber one.
Yeah, and it is with the attempt to work with steel. The physical stuff begins to be something that I'm very conscious of in the beginning, because working with steel was a real problem.
Well, working with steel remains a problem, because there's only one steel work in this show.
Two. Frill
and breakdown. There's only, apart from breakdown, there's only one steel work.
I didn't enjoy it at all, working with steel.
Whereas, up against the kind of obduracy of steel making.
Yeah, I mean, I think up until my fellowship with the British Steel Corporation, the stuff that I'm using is a means to an end. It's not incorporated in determining the end in the same degree. It's not the only way this thing could be made. I mean, those reliefs could be made out of other material than what they are made out of. This could be remade in steel or something. The fiberglass pieces are made out of fiberglass, but they don't have to be.
Yeah, why did you use fiberglass?
Well, it was relatively inexpensive. You could make quite large things that were light and maneuverable, relatively inexpensively. And we were under the illusion that they were more durable than they actually are initially, and we had no sense that the material was in any degree toxic to use. So it seemed to be a kind of great gift in a way to have this new material that you could make almost anything out of.